It wasn't until the 9th century that the Chinese stumbled across the invention that allowed the development of long-range ballistic weapons. It is the one single Chinese invention that did more to rewrite history than any other. Gunpowder. Gunpowder is thought to have been discovered in the mid-800s AD. It was first used in fireworks, but military engineers soon realized its potential for war. It is the use of gunpowder as a propellant to fire missiles across the battlefield that changed the history of warfare and introduced a class of weapon we associate with the modern battlefield: the rocket.
The Chinese not only invented gunpowder, but by about the year 1100, they had realised that by varying the proportions of the ingredients they used, they could produce gunpowder tailored to specific requirements. And one of these was the slow and even burning powder needed to propel rockets.
But there was still a lot of work to do. Without any way of guiding the rocket, it would zoom about like a let-go balloon. To make the rocket fly toward the enemy, the Chinese engineers began to investigate ballistic properties. They turned for inspiration to a missile that had been around for centuries: the arrow. By adapting the use of flights to stabilize the trajectory, they soon found they could send the rocket in a straight line toward the enemy. This is the basic aerodynamic principle that underpins all of today's rocket technology, and gave the Chinese a tactical advantage during the Battle of Kai-Keng in the 13th century, when they repelled the Mongol invaders by unleashing a rocket firestorm. Not satisfied, the Chinese investigated further uses for their new weapon. They attempted to launch not one, but hundreds.
The 100 Tiger rocket launcher was an extremely sophisticated and ingenious piece of equipment for its day. It consisted basically of a box launcher mounted on top of a wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow was a simple one-wheel type as used on Chinese farms for hundreds of years.
All of the rockets were fired using a single fuse, and to ensure a wide dispersion, the launchers were wider at the top and narrower at the base. This meant, as the rockets were fired, they splayed out across the whole battlefield.
This made it much more effective as a psychological weapon, because no one could tell where they were going to strike. 100 rockets would be fired more or less simultaneously, spreading out over a very wide area, their trajectories hidden by the smoke and the flame. And the entire enemy army would have been in fear of the thing. Even though there were only 100 missiles, it would be impossible to tell who was within the danger zone and who was not.
The hail of thousands of rocket arrows unleashed on their enemy had similar devastating psychological effects as the modern multiple rocket launch systems found on today's battlefields. The gunpowder weapons invented in China soon inspired similar war machines to be developed throughout Asia and the Middle East. In Seoul, the modern capital of South Korea, in its War Memorial Museum, there is stunning evidence of a rocket launcher developed in 1400 AD, 500 years before the modern multiple launch rocket systems of today's armed forces. The machine is a development of the Chinese model.
Scientists developed the Hwacha rocket launcher, an anti-personnel weapon that was capable of launching 100 rockets at once.
Hwacha's weapons saw the most extensive action during the Japanese invasion of Korea in the 16th century. In one battle, it is reported that nearly 3,000 Korean troops repelled over 40,000 Japanese soldiers, with the help of just 40 Hwacha rocket launchers. To maximize range and devastation, the gunners fired the rockets at 45 degrees, giving this weapon a danger zone of up to 450 feet.
You imagine thousands and thousands of fire arrows hurtling into massed ranks of infantry. The carnage would be indescribable.
But rocket-based weapons were developed one step further by the brilliant engineers of the Chinese military. In the Military Museum in Beijing, there is evidence that the military commanders commissioned lightweight, handheld rocket launchers.
It's it's remarkable to understand that they developed a single handheld rocket launcher, a sort of very early bazooka or RPG. Perhaps not as accurate as a modern version, but certainly scary on that ancient battlefield.
For the first time in 500 years, the Ancient Discoveries team will test this deadly weapon. To their ballistic scientists and military engineers. But there is one weapon from antiquity that brings together all these factors: the firepower, the range, and the maneuverability. It is a weapon whose functionality would not be out of place in a modern fighting unit. The handheld rocket launcher. Ancient Chinese texts describe such a weapon from the 14th century. But debate rages as to how it would have worked and how effective it was. Today, our team of weapons makers and explosives experts are about to test the handheld superweapon of the ancient Chinese battlefield. Our daring experiment will be carried out in a remote location in southern England. This is a very dangerous test and requires hours of preparation. Model maker Richard Windley and explosives expert Charlie Adcock are setting up the test. Richard has used ancient blueprints from China to recreate the handheld rocket launcher.
This is one of the smaller devices. It's not the smallest. The smallest one was called a bee's nest, and this was a portable device. It weighed 2 or 3 pounds. A soldier could carry 4 or 5 of these rocket batteries quite comfortably. The soldier would have access to one single fuse, so just touching one fuse would simultaneously ignite the whole batch.
Richard hands over the bee's nest to Charlie, who has handled explosives on many motion pictures, including James Bond and Saving Private Ryan. It is a dangerous test and requires Charlie to handle the explosives away from the rest of the crew.
This is probably the first time that the bee's nest multiple rocket launcher has been fired in modern times. We've got a barrage of 12 rockets. The pyrotechnician is now fusing them up. They're about ready to go, so we're just about due to light them and see what the result is going to be.
We film in super slow motion at 10,000 frames per second, 2,000 times slower than real life. After ignition, the multiple rockets leave the launcher in a devastating battery of fire. In under a second, all 4 rockets disperse over distances of 500 feet. The Chinese bee's nest launcher laid the foundations for modern warfare techniques and provided the inspiration for today's rocket-propelled grenades. It is incredible to think that the ancients manufactured super ballistic weapons whose principles and tactics we still use today. Thousands of years ago, they were creating an array of weapons that would be recognizable to the modern soldier. Yet what new discoveries remain out there? Discoveries that will turn everything we thought we knew about the ancient world on its head. Will we have to rewrite the history books?